Good morning. Today we're going to go over some story writing reminders and tips. So this week, while we were off for the Easter break, I read over everyone's rough drafts of their stories, and I must say your story ideas were awesome. You guys had great thoughts, bright ideas, and I really enjoyed reading some of your creative stories and ideas. But there's some reminders that I want to go over before we do our corrections and rewrite for our final copies. So we're going to go through some of these. I want to remind you that a story is not a summary, so you don't need to be so obvious with some of your writing. For example, some people want to just say the problem was, and that's just too obvious. We want our reader to figure out what the problem was. They can know what the problem was without you saying the problem was or the problem is. So here's an example of what not to do when I say don't be so obvious. We shouldn't write something like this story is about. That sounds more like a summary. We want to begin with a good hook. So instead of saying this story is about, we want to start off with something maybe like this. Have you ever been to Yosemite National Park? If so, maybe you've seen me. So this story introduces what the story is going to be about without saying this story is about. We want to make sure that we do that to be interesting. Also, we want to begin our sentences in lots of different ways. So here's an example of something that would not be interesting. I'm a pine tree. I live in a big forest in Louisiana. I love birds. So we don't want to start all our sentences with I, or another word. That would be pretty boring. Here's something that would be more interesting instead of saying I. What's green, tall, and full of cones? Well, that would be me, Piney the pine tree. I live in North Louisiana in a huge, beautiful forest. Hunters visit my home a lot. So here, we don't say I all the time. We have some different ways of beginning our sentences. We want to make use of that. Another reminder is to keep your story in the same verb tense. If it happened in the past and you're retelling your story, keep all of your verbs in the past tense. Just the same if you're in present tense, keep everything in present tense. Use details and phrases to make your story interesting. Here's an example. It makes me happy when people sit by me. We can change some of these simple words. We can use details and phrases to be more interesting. So here we're going to take it makes me happy when people sit by me and make it a little more interesting. We changed it to when families sit happily under me to rest and relax, it makes my heart fill with joy. So instead of saying happy, the reader can figure out that the tree is happy because it makes my heart fill with joy. Must mean I'm really happy. Much more interesting there. Okay, we don't want to repeat words over and over. We want to use interesting word choices as well. So instead of saying I felt sad or I felt sad again, we could change it to tears came to my eyes because I was so lonely. This means I'm sad, but I've said it in a much more interesting way than just the word sad. So many of you can do something like this in your stories instead of just being so straightforward with one word. Here's something that a lot of people do. You should alternate names and words and pronouns in your writing. Alternate means go back and forth with the name and then the pronoun for the name. For example, here's the name I'm going to use in my story, Joe. Joe loved to climb my branches. When Joe really tried, he could reach my highest limbs. I knew Joe was happiest at the tip top of me. Wow, yelled Joe. So here I've used the word Joe, his name, a lot. So I'm going to alternate some of these. So I said Joe loved to climb my branches. That's okay because I need to know that Joe is the person I'm talking about. But right here, I can change Joe and say he, because I know now that I'm talking about Joe. When he really tried, he could reach my highest limbs. Now we're going to leave Joe here because we just used he in the last sentence. I knew Joe was happiest at the tip top of me. Wow, yelled Joe. Instead of saying Joe again right here, I'm going to change Joe and I'm going to add he right here. He yelled. So now I have Joe in this sentence, he in this sentence, Joe in the next sentence, and he in the last sentence. So I've alternated the names and the name and the pronoun to make it not sound all the same. Another good tip for us. All right. So here are some other reminders. We want to remember to read over the rubric that's in your story packet. That will be how I'm going to grade the story. So make sure that everything on the rubric that you've done the best you can. And don't forget to complete your cover sheet for your story, which should have the title correctly written and your picture. And you can either print the picture from a computer and glue it, or you can illustrate it yourself, which means draw neatly and color it completely all shaded in the box on the cover. So thanks for being great authors, and I look forward to reading your final copies. Keep writing.